West. My name is Eric Rossborough. I am associate librarian and senior cataloger. I'm the senior cataloger at the McCracken Library, and we're very excited about today's talk. Bob, myself, the McCracken Library in the Center of the West have been really gratified by the support you've given us with this speaking project. We couldn't do it without you, and we're really gratified to see the people showing up every time to hear Bob talk about this interesting historical stuff. And with that in mind, I want you to know we have future talks coming up. We have one planned for every month of the year. Most of the time they will be on the third Thursday, but not every single month. And if you have any questions about any of that, please give me a call. So next month will be Thursday, March 17, with a tentative topic of Ned Frost. We're going to talk about the great Ned Frost and his partner Fred Richard and their artistic activities as well as their outdoor activities. Anyway, I know you didn't come here to hear me talk. I know you came here to hear Bob talk. So with that, I'm going to give you Bob. Bob, if you don't know, is a lifelong Wyoming resident. His varied experiences are pure West. Boy, you got that right. He started working as a cowboy at age 10. He started working as a hunting guide at age 11. He operated grub stake expeditions, running tours into Yellowstone Park, and that just scratches the surface. He's also written several books, and Bob will be signing those books upstairs at the bookstore after, so please join us to hang out, socialize, and get a signed book. And with that, I give you the man, Bob Richard.
Thank you for coming today. A little slippery getting here, but it's, can you hear me all right in the back? This topic is one that's close to my heart. I grew up with Husky Oil in Cody, Wyoming. Cody and the families in Cody were part of Husky Oil. They were a part of the Nielsen family. And as we go through, I'm going to share that with you. And as you have questions, if you'll save them until the end. But I have learned more in the last 3 weeks, and I've had a lot of help. I went to Jay Nielsen, and said, I want to do this. I said, I have my dad's photographs. And he took photographs of everything the Nielsens and Husky Oil did. He flew to Canada. He flew elsewhere, Dixon, North Dakota. But Dad was involved in flying in the different aircraft, and we'll talk about that a little bit. I had a lot of help from Gary Duggleby. His dad was chief pilot. I had a lot of help from Butch Russell, who flew 18 years. And Butch, thank you for coming today with your family. And he has shared photographs, quarterly newspapers that I didn't know anything about, that Glenn published for the employees. But you'll learn more about that, and I'll share with you as we go through. I have learned 10 times more than I knew 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I thought I knew all about the Nielsens and Husky Oil. I hope that I can leave you today with a little more knowledge. And the Nielsens are still involved in Cody. Their most favorite thing right now is Choice Aviation, and they have FBOs in Montana as well as Wyoming, and serving the people of 2 states. But let's get started. Thank you for being here. Okay, lights. I'm pressing the wrong thing. This is where I got my information along with the people I've already mentioned. Husky Oil started in 1938. In 1978, there was an unfriendly takeover. Glenn was chairman of the board, and Jim was president. And they struggled and tried to keep Husky under their control, and they worked with several different companies, and after 6 months, they were taken over by Alberta gas trunk lines. I'm having trouble seeing without glasses today. All right. Olive and Glenn were married 69 years, almost 70 years. And there's the dates of Olive and Glenn. Their children, Margaret Ruth and Reuben, lived here. Jim Nielsen, his spouse, Ann Young, do live here. They're in Florida, enjoying the sunshine right now. Joanne and I knew him as Joe Livingston, are in California. Anne Marie is down in Cheyenne with her husband. And Bill Nielsen now has passed away, but his family's here. There were 35 grandchildren and 68 great-grandchildren, and that was back in the 80s. So I'm sure that has increased exponentially. Glenn's civic organizations included the LDS Church, very involved during his lifetime, the Boy Scouts of America, the Coe Memorial Hospital, Buffalo Bill Historic Center, Center of the West, and Olive was as involved with the church, music club, play readers, and Girl Scouts of America. And I think most of the community experienced their involvement in many of those things, and we can thank Glenn for being a part of helping the Buffalo Bill Historic Center become what it is today. Some of the major donors to Park County, Cody, and Wyoming: Glenn Nielsen, W.R. Coe, and I learned the other day as I was interviewing people that W.R. Coe financed the paving of Main Street when they first paved it. I didn't know that, but his grandson bragged it to Ron Hill, and I learned it from Ron Hill. But everyone was touched or worked for Husky back in the early days of the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. E.J. Goppert, Grant Taggart, Millward Simpson, Lloyd Taggart, Sr., Bud Webster, Jerry Housel, and others have contributed not only to this facility, but other things in Cody and the surrounding area and the state of Wyoming. Aviation. These are some of the planes that Glenn used during his tenure with Husky Oil. And we'll go through and look at some of the photographs. I have names of a few that I got visiting with Butch Russell. And Glenn liked to find people in Wyoming, especially Cody, Park County, or the northern part of Wyoming, and train them. And he trained them also as whatever their specialty was to be the very best ever, whether they were pilots, aircraft mechanics, or working over at Husky Oil. And he found that he retained them, and they didn't want to move somewhere where it was warmer or whatever. He involved the Elgin Flying Service and McHugh Aviation, and Mike McHugh also flew for Husky for 7 years, but then he became the FBO when he bought it from Elgin Flying Service. Husky asphalt was popular for major airports. Salt Lake and others used it because the asphalt that they had worked well and was the smoothest, according to the pilots, when they paved their runways with it. Gary Brannon was an employee and a sculptor that gave a bust to Glenn when he retired. Glenn was chairman of the Husky board in '78, and Jim was the president of Husky Oil. 1938, Husky Oil started on January 1st. This shows you the transfer of ownership to Husky. There was quite an article that came out on Empire, and with Glenn's photograph in front of the refinery, telling about the unfriendly takeover, but I gathered lots and lots of information from this article in Empire, which is a Denver Post, and it's at the library, and several people here in town still have copies. These are some of the important people. When Glenn went to get a loan to operate Husky Oil, the banks, even as far away as Chicago, said, no, you're not a good risk. And he came home, and these gentlemen said, we'll support you and we'll make the loans to you. And because of that, this became his first board. Millward Simpson, E.J. Goppert, Grant Taggart, and then Lloyd Taggart Sr. came on board. And they guided with Glenn the direction of Husky Oil. And that's a portrait of Glenn sitting in a chair in my dad's studio. And then over on the right is Ray Pranty, who drove the Husky bus and picked the workers that went to Husky offices and worked at the Husky refinery. And he picked them up and he took them home. And he kept getting newer and newer buses, but and he finally retired in the 70s. This is another shot with Ray on 12th Street. And then the smaller photograph is one of his newer buses. In 1939, Husky acquired their first service stations and got started. And of course, one of the first was Gordon's Husky service station on the corner that we all used to go to. And that's Gordon in front of the front door of Husky Superstop. And that's one of the gas pumps, the original gas pumps. And I think that's stored here in the museum somewhere. Another shot with a Husky dog in the back seat of a convertible. Must have been taken in the summertime. He also started a trucking company, and then he sold it to Ron Hill's father, and then he bought it back, but he was trucking oil all the way out to California. He was getting oil from many different places. And of course, growing rapidly, they had to get oil tanks on rails, and they started sending oil this way to the West Coast. And here are some of the different signs of Husky through the years. And hopefully you all can read the dates on those. I always like that big Husky dog, and I'll share with you more on that a little later. This is one of Dad's photographs with the maze of pipes over at Husky. This is an aerial of my father's. This is after the bridge. Some people call it the Kogo Bridge or the Belfry Bridge was built, but it gives you a pretty good picture of what was there. In '43, they built a second refinery. How many of you knew that there was another refinery? And where was it? It was in Riverton. And Riverton had a refinery, and he was supplying all the fuel being burned by naval ships going out of the West Coast and the Pacific during the war. Following that, down near the bottom, the refinery was dismantled in Riverton and moved up to Cody. Then he began in 46 with operations in Canada. And they expanded in the 6 western states. But he also expanded with rubberized asphalt and even sent it overseas to Sweden. They also sealed and put these in ditches, and I learned this morning, not only here, but several places in Montana. And I think that's Jess Moore on the right with Taggart Construction that we're doing the work of sealing this canal on Hart Mountain. This is a bridge over on I-25 out of Casper. Took a while and a lot of help to me to figure out where they were doing this with the rubberized asphalt. Mystery X Plastic. I had somebody come in this morning and says, I think I have a can in my storage locker today. Well, it's worth a lot of money to a collector of Mystery X Plastic. I didn't realize they made batteries as well as oil cans with Husky, but I was still growing up as these things were being produced. Now I put this in here. This is one of Taggart's, Lloyd Taggart Sr.'s construction company. This patrol, Glenn said to Lloyd, I need to have a strip made on a hayfield up in Crandall. And Lloyd says, no problem. When do you want it there? And Lloyd said he'd have it taken up there. And I was working for Husky in the summers, and Lloyd gave me a call and said, will you take this patrol up to Crandall? And I said, sure. Well, we didn't get to it till about the middle of October. And let me tell you, without a windshield or a cab, it got really cold. And when I got the top of Dead Indian, who was there but Glenn and Olive with a thermos of hot soup? And she had an extra coat and wanted to be sure I was warm enough to get on up to Crandall. And when I got there, we went on up to their cabin and got me warmed up, and then they brought me back to Cody. But they were always thinking of others, and the leadership from the family, and not only Glenn and Jim and Olive, but all the family always carried over and still carries over in this community. And this is just one of my experiences. Husky bought Gates City Steel. Their headquarters was in Nebraska, but they were spread out all over the United States. Then along in 1953, Jack Duggleby came along, and a short time later, he became chief pilot. He had spent the World War II years training Navy pilots to fly to go to war. And he knew his way around, and he was just a super person, and became a friend, and a friend of my dad's who liked to catch rides anywhere so he could take pictures. This is one of the twin-engine beaches that they had, one of the early ones, and some of the rodeo queens that were taken somewhere by Husky Oil at no cost to them. Mel Brayton is on the left, and I just can't name all the people. I wish I could. They flew Santa Claus around the basin. I don't know where else he went, but this is a single engine Bonanza. This is a group of men. The mechanic on the left is Ed McDonald and his son Sidney, or Sid as I knew him. And I had Sid when I ran the Stock Natatorium, and he swam for me. And then there's a list of other people there. But I keep finding all these photographs, mostly Dad's, but others that were in the Gary Duggleby files or Butch Russell's, and very helpful to me. This is a favorite. This is the B-25, the Mitchell, the Shoshone Canyon, Cedar, Rattlesnake, looking up the North Fork, partially up the South Fork, and looking down on Cody. And that was also the letterhead that my dad used with Jack Richard photography. It's one of my favorites. And along with that, I would get to ride with Jack Duggleby once in a while, and they heard, or Glenn Nielsen heard, that I was going back to Quantico, Virginia to go through OCS. And he says, no sense of you taking an airline, we'll just drop you off in Quantico. So they loaded me up, and we took off, and Glenn visited with me for about a half hour, what my goals were, what my direction of life was going to be. And then I was invited to sit up with Jack Duggleby, and we flew to Quantico. I said, are we going to have any trouble getting in there? He says, no, I know the Navy well and the Marine Corps. He says, no problem. And we went in and landed. Well, when I stepped off the plane, I was walking on top of the world. Here I was, a young man going into the Marine Corps, and when my feet hit that concrete, there was a tough old sergeant looked at me and he says, boy, get over here. And things went downhill for the next 16 weeks. But I had a great ride there and good memories of sharing with Husky. This is a Cessna 180 up at Crandall, and they had to clean the snow off before they could fly it. And there were 3 men getting the snow off so that they could fly Glenn and Ollie back to town. This is the airfield that patrol cleaned off and cleaned the hayfield down, and their cabin was right up there, and this was his getaway place for years. This is one of the Howards and one of the last reciprocal engine aircraft that they used to fly back and forth to the East Coast. These are some of the first jets that they added to their fleet. And if you look, there's the Heart Mountain Canal, Red Butte, and the side of Rattlesnake. This is one of their last jets. High-powered, lots of engines, 2 on each side, and it burned fuel like crazy. They also leased 737s when they went to Alaska. There's one of their drilling rigs at Camp Lonely in Alaska. I didn't know they went to Alaska. Let me tell you, they were worldwide before we get through here. This is part of their fleet of aircraft that were here, and they had them in Calgary, and they also had aircraft up in Anchorage. They also leased from Chrysler and Avery. This is a Hiller 12E, and they picked up a buffalo that was flown in, and that's a plastic buffalo that went to the museum here and then was flown up on top of Cedar Mountain thanks to Husky Oil. It's still up there, badly beat up, and then somebody painted it white a couple of years ago, but it's still there. Here are some of the mechanics and pilots, and Butch Russell is the one sitting next to Mike McHugh when they got Duggleby put into the Wyoming Aviation Hall of Fame. In '57, the company began international exploration, and they started a truck stop chain. This is in Cheyenne. He also had a student program, and every summer they had students that they brought over to Husky and trained them in different facets of the refinery, and helped kids that wanted to go on to school and then they went to college. He brought them back again. They had graduations, and then once they graduated, he offered to hire them and hired a lot of them. This was a group from Powell that came over. They bought a briquetting plant in Dixon, North Dakota. And I can remember when they started that, and Tom Kincaid was in charge of it. And I thought, what in the world are they doing building briquettes? But it was very successful. And that gives you another view of their making briquettes for charcoal. There's the bags. I can remember using them here in Cody and family using them. And Tom marketed them all over the U.S. Husky then in 1960 became the parent company of our Husky Oil here. And Glenn was going back and forth to Calgary on a regular basis. That gives you a picture of Huskies spread out in the U.S. All the way down here in the Gulf Coast, over on the right, all the way up Alaska, and a lot of concentration in Canada. All this was part of Husky Oil, and Glenn Nielsen and Jim led the company. They built several pipelines to Lloydminster, Alberta, which sat right on the edge of Alberta and Saskatchewan. And they acquired more than 1 million acres of heavy oil leases in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Take a look at that. This is the Alberta-Saskatchewan division of the Alberta and Saskatchewan. And there are little black marks where he had wells. But think of 1 million acres of land that he put into production. How he could look ahead, but he surrounded himself with leaders like himself that managed and ran Husky Oil, but he never forgot about the community and helping this community and giving back to this community. But he took care of families here that were in need. He had his pilots on call 24 hours a day in case there was somebody that needed to go to Denver, Salt Lake, or elsewhere, and it was an emergency. They were on call to take them there. Most people didn't know that unless they had a crisis. And I've talked to several that said, yeah, my dad had a heart attack. In fact, it was Mike McHugh's dad, and Husky flew him to Denver. Uh, I'm amazed at the things that the Nielsen's and Husky Oil did for people in our community. Husky bought Frontier Refining in Cheyenne, some of the oil tanks down there. He added a third pipeline at Lloydminster. This is students that were graduating. He held graduations and recognized them. And I looked at it very carefully. That's Sam Allen. I had him on my swim team in the 70s. Joe Umflett. Some of the others I recognize, but I can't pull their names up. But Glenn and Jim made it a point not only to recognize people, reward them, but he had service recognition. If they did a good job, he recognized them. He was constantly praising people because they were doing such a good job, and he had a high retaining of people working with him. And then I found that he was involved in the North Sea. I never knew that, but I learned. And take a look at it. All those red spots are places east of England involved in many different countries, and they were drilling. Wow. And it all was originating right out of Cody, Wyoming. I was mind-boggled. Then, here he is in the Sulu Sea. And I says, where's that? It sounds like I've been there. It's right below the Philippines. And this is right after the Vietnam conflict, but there they were. I mean, I am amazed, but Husky Oil was the largest oil company of its type in America in the 70s. In 75, he developed a natural gas program in New Mexico, and then he jumped into Alaska. This is giving you an idea of the North Slope, and he had an otter, and he hired a young man that had come up through his summer programs, and then went to work for him as an auditor in his financial end, and then he put him up at Anchorage for 3 years doing all his leasing, and that was Denny Shore. And Denny Shore was a basketball player here, and but he helped people achieve their goals, but he also achieved his goals. He was quite a leader in our community as well as in the world. And then he found oil just north. If you drive over there, you see oil wells pumping just north of where the old refinery is. It's amazing to me. But he found oil all around here. Here's another spot up South Fork. Then in 76, he helped to bring John Wayne here. He had the rifle built, and Denny Shore was involved in the community, and he was, I think, president of the parade committee that year. And then that rifle, a couple of years later, ended up on top of Steck's building behind the Irma. And it's still there. That's the history of that rifle. But the Nielsen's and Husky Oil had their fingers in so many pies, community-wise and family-wise. And I've heard them say that the people in Cody were their family. This is an oil field just north of the ranch headquarters of the Hoodoo. When I was reading about it, I had to call J.D. Radakovich, who was here a couple of months ago, and I said, all right, J.D., where is this oil field? Oh, he says it's just north of the ranch. So I had to go take a look at it. It's still pumping oil. This is a favorite photograph of Glenn Nielsen on the phone in his office. This is Glenn and Olive. They're favorites of mine. This is a book that I found on black gold and a lot of history on Husky Oil. Glenn wrote Episodes in My Life. I haven't gotten my hands on this book yet, but the photograph, and that's only half the family there. Dad took a picture of the whole family. And the book is available, but how neat that he did publish these things. Glenn and Olive. This is an aerial of Dad's. Looking down, you can see that in the late 50s, Husky Oil bought the Burlington Cody Inn and moved it down and enlarged with the hotel building and refurbished it and made it into their headquarters of Husky Oil. And you can see it. This is the main original part, and then the back is the Burlington Inn that they moved from up here. Pretty amazing. There's the full family photograph taken in the late 70s. It's a Jack Richard photo. Then here we have Glenn Nielsen, Millward Simpson. I don't know the center man. If anyone knows, I'd love to know who it is. And Bud Webster with the Cole Memorial Hospital. They're the ones that got these things done, got them built, and very involved. They also were some of the people involved in the development of the Buffalo Bill center of the West that we have today, and they're still involved. Yes. You're right, exactly. Thank you. Mac, would you write that down, please? By the way, Mac's supposed to be down here coaching me, but thank you for your recognizing him. Bob Woodruff owned the TE Ranch for years, and then when he retired, he made sure that someone else, the president, bought the TE. It's still involved in people from Coca-Cola. This is what started out as Husky's headquarters. And notice no trees, but it's coming along pretty well. That's one of the ponds without trees. And then after Glenn and Husky and the takeover, it was sold to Marathon. And it's changed, and now the county owns it. Here's a gold pan that was given to Denny, Sue, and their 2 children when he finished the job in Alaska, and recognition. He was always careful to recognize the people that got things accomplished and got them done. This is one of his quarterly inside newspapers called Inside Husky. And Butch has a number of those copies that he's going to make available at the archives. And I just couldn't believe all that I was reading in those archives, as well as in these Inside Husky quarterly magazines that every employee got. This is also down here in front, and it has a little derrick, and apparently most of the employees stuck at desks got one of these, and if you tip it over, it's very difficult to get the derrick upright and centered. And I think there's some employees here that had this, and I was lucky enough to get my hands on this to share with you today. But it took me about 10 minutes before I could get the derrick upright. But Husky was thoughtful of its employees and did so many nice things for the families. It's amazing to me. The community recognized Husky and the Nielsen's in the 50s, but this is at his retirement. And this was one of his employees that sculpted a bust of Glenn Nielsen for his retirement. Gary Branham was a year older than I and lived in Powell, but I couldn't find his name, if he's alive now or not. But what a nice thing to give Glenn and Olive. This was in Butch Russell's notebook, and I kind of like that Husky dog. This is part of the Husky Refinery. Rattlesnake Mountain in the background. My dad loved to take night pictures of the lights, and he used different filters to get the lights to look like stars. And then Mac Frost found this. Every Christmas, the Nielsen saw to it that the lights were changed to add to Christmas. I mean, I think it's kind of neat. This is another aerial of my dad's. Glenn also had two boats up on Husky boats up on Yellowstone Lake. One was his personal boat. The other was for employees of Husky or guests of Husky. And he had two men that took care of them every summer. And this is a group of the students that came up for a day to go fishing, and this is on Frank Island. This is at the Scout Camp. Husky Oil and Glenn Nielsen built the Boy Scout camp on the North Fork. And then Husky Oil used it for meetings. And I mean, to give that to the Boy Scouts of America and to the Casper Central Wyoming Council, I thought was amazing. He supervised or had men supervise its being built. It was built with dead trees that were skinned and logged, and a big meeting room, kitchen, bathrooms, and it's still being used. This is one of the Husky dogs that was either a bookend or pen and pencil set. This was given to Butch Russell when he was a pilot and was recognized by Husky Oil. This is Jimmy Doolittle and two of the Husky pilots. And they flew Jimmy Doolittle for years around the country when he needed to go somewhere. Strictly a courtesy to the man that flew the Mitchell off the carriers and made the first bombing runs on Japan. Here are some of the pilots and people who were flying the jets for Husky, and Butch Russell is next to the man with the red tie. He has his trench coat on. I guess they had to have that as part of their uniform. Wyoming News was published by a gentleman here at the Cody Enterprise, Lee Myers, and he told the story of the takeover of Husky Oil in '78. It's in the library. A very interesting read. That's my favorite Husky dog, and that was done by Ed Grigware. I think that's the best Husky dog that we in Cody can ever claim, and done by our own artist, Ed Grigware. This is when they got a distinguished award for community service in our town back in the 50s, and this was done by Ed Grigware. Husky gets you this, or gets you through, I'm sorry. And that's up through the Shoshone Canyon. But Ed Grigware always contributed his artwork. He's the one that did the one of Nimitz that's in my book upstairs on Admiral Nimitz' visit here in 1946 with his Pacific Fleet staff. Photograph of Glenn. This is Jim when he was president. This is Choice Aviation today, one of 6 FBOs in Montana and Wyoming, flying people privately when they can't catch a commercial flight or they want to go with Choice. Millward and Lorna Simpson that have always been a part of, and I think one of the best stories is when Millward and Glenn bought many of the businesses during the war. When the men that owned them went to war, they bought them, saw that they were managed properly, and when they came back, he sold their businesses back for what he bought them for. Most people didn't know that. But it tells you a lot about the character and the family of Nielsen's, and it's still continuing today. Paul Stock is another one of those major donors, and on the right is W.R. Coe that has had his finger in here, the hospital, all over Cody, and all over Wyoming, as does the Paul Stock Foundation. I have a couple of minutes for questions. And I have lots of questions, but it's your chance to ask me, and I have several people here that probably will help us answer them. Any questions?
Any questions for Bob?
I didn't do that good a job, but thank you. Yes, sir.
Thinking about the gas.
You helped, Charles, you helped drill both north of Husky, and you also worked in the 2 Moon oil field. At Half Moon, yeah. Anyway, I think of Half Moon as the bar up on Rattlesnake Creek when I was a kid. We could always buy beer there when we were underage. I didn't say that really. Yes. What's that? Oh, well, that's your fault. Thank you for coming. I'll be upstairs. They have the books available there by the cash register, and I'd be happy to sign them. And if there are no other questions, thank you for coming, and thank you for being part of our group.